Hello everybody and welcome to another video. In this video, we start a brand new topic known as return values. Um, Before I start typing code about returns, I just wanted to give you guys a brief background about what returns are and what they're used for. Returns is basically the idea of being able to capture something. Think of it like this: when you throw a water balloon to somebody, they either have two options. They either can catch it or they can drop it. And whenever you catch it, that's the idea. And what that has to do with returns is whenever you catch the water balloon, it's the idea that you are saving that value and you have access to that value and you can do whatever you want to that water balloon. And the idea of when you drop a water balloon is the fact that when you drop that water balloon, you no longer have access to that water balloon. You can no longer do anything with it. You can no longer, you don't have a reference to it no more. And so that's the idea of returns. Returns basically allows you to be able to compute values or do whatever you want and be able to save that from different methods later on. So let me go ahead and get started. I will go ahead and create a class, public class, and I'll call it returns. Returns. And let me go ahead and just write public static void main string args. And let me go ahead and make a method. I'll just call it public static void, and I'll just say close. I'll just say returns. Basically, we've been talking about methods. We can go ahead and just compile this. Let me just go ahead and compile this and run it. So now what's the whole idea of returns? Let's say I want this method to be able to return the number, any number that I want. Let's say age, for example. Let me just call this method age. And there's the idea in Java where you can say the method will be able to return something. So I could just say return age. Let me just return somebody's age. So notice how when I type return, turn purple, that's because it's a keyword. And if I just do this, let's go ahead and compile this. This is basically returning an age. And returns are basically the idea where this method will be able to compute a value and be able to store a value. So later on, whenever you call this method, you know that this method will be able to return to you the age. Um, there's nice applications, but this is just the most basic form of returns. If I go ahead and compile it, we can see incompatible type, unexpected return value. And this is where I feel like most people are just so confused about. The idea here being we are returning a value, but the compiler is telling us, hey, why are you returning something in this method? Remember how the first day of lectures, like not the first day, probably the second, third day, I can't remember what day it was. Remember how I always said your method should be defined as public, static, void, and then give it whatever name you want. And then I think a couple of videos ago we talked about what goes in here. These are parameters. In this case, this method does not take in any parameters. So what the compiler is complaining to you about is that this method is a basic method. Whenever you see the word void in a method, that means that this method will not return anything. So if you want to be able to return and have the return keyword in this method, you have to explicitly define and tell the method, hey, I will be returning something from this method. So what you do is the variable that you will be returning will be whatever you change this into. Remember how I said the first day of class, every method should start with public static void. You don't have to worry about those until later on. Now we'll talk about this part of the method, which is void. Just remember whenever you have a return, you always have the word whatever value you are returning. In this case, what is 20? 20 is basically an int. So what do I type into here? I type int. This is just mind blowing. Let me just compile this and show you what I mean. Why did this compile? Because in Java, this is just the syntax for Java. Whenever you see the word void, so if you have public static void or public static void, you know that this method is not going to return anything. You can't have a return inside this method. So if you want to be able to return something, you need to explicitly define that this method will return something. If I make this a string for however, it's going to say, let's compile it. It's saying incompatible type. Int cannot be converted to a string. So in this case, we are, think of this like you are declaring the method. You are explicitly telling the method, hey, I am going to be able to return to you a string. But in this case, we are breaking our method header signature. We are saying when I return 20, you are returning an int. And so the compiler is just confused. And what the compiler is saying is, hey, you promised me that you will return a string, but in this case, you're returning 20. So if I want to actually return a string, I can say my name, for example, Abdullah, and I can compile it. And so that's just basically the whole introduction to returns. Obviously, there's more to this, which we will dissect in future videos. But what I want you to be able to understand is that returns is basically the idea of bringing back methods. And instead of having methods be the most basic thing you can have, such as system.println, system.println, do this, you could have the method, for example, say take somebody's BMI and calculate their BMI and return it. And then later on, you can use that method to be able to get its value out. And we will definitely look into this some more. But that's just basically the whole underlying details and a quick introduction to returns. I hope to see you in another video. Thanks for watching.